Order. Christina Rees to move the motion.
Thank you, Ms. Elliott, and it's always a pleasure to serve under your chairpersonship. I beg to move that this House has considered e-petition 640062 relating to carers' allowance. The petition was started by Alistair Adam and has 13,914 signatures. It asks the government to increase carers' allowance to 35 hours a week at the minimum wage, and specifically that the government increase the amount of carers' allowance to match pay for a full-time job. Unpaid carers eligible for carers' allowance receive £76 and £75 a week to provide at least 35 hours of care to people in receipt of certain benefits. This amount is almost £300 less than someone earning the national living wage would be entitled to, and that many unpaid carers must give up work to provide care. And being a carer can also have a significant impact on carers' well-being and lifestyle. The government has responded to say that carers' allowance is a benefit that provides some financial recognition that a carer may not be able to work full-time. It is part of a range of support based on individual needs rather than a wage. The government fully recognise the invaluable contribution that unpaid and family carers make in providing significant care and continuity of support to their loved ones. Unpaid carers play a vital role in the lives of their family and friends. And since 2010, we have increased carers' allowance by almost £1,200 a year. It is my honour, Madam Chair, to present this petition this evening, to highlight a grave concern that weighs heavily on the hearts of many across our nation. It's a concern that affects the very fabric of our society, the inadequacies of carers' allowance in the UK. In a society that prides itself on compassion and support for those in need, it is disheartening to witness the struggles endured by countless caregivers who selflessly dedicate their lives to caring for loved ones. The carers' allowance intended to provide financial assistance to these unsung heroes falls drastically short of meeting their needs. First and foremost, let us acknowledge the monumental contributions of caregivers. They are the backbone of our communities, often sacrificing their own livelihoods and personal aspirations to ensure the well-being of others. Their existence saves the taxpayer billions of pounds every year. Yet despite their invaluable role, many caregivers find themselves living on the brink of poverty due to the inadequacy of carers' allowance. You'd be forgiven for thinking that carers' allowance is some extra money for someone who pops in to check on an elderly neighbour. However, in the vast majority of cases, it is paid to someone who cares round the clock for a close relative. During my research for this speech, I heard testimony from the petitioner Alistair, as well as from carers Jackie and Katie from the We Care campaign, which specifically advocates for unpaid carers. All three cared for close relatives, parents, child and partner, respectively. Alistair spoke of the challenges of making ends meet in circumstances that are far from black and white. His carers' allowance often needed to go on household items and supporting his father. Living month to month means there is no money for unexpected outgoings. Jackie told me about caring for a 28-year-old daughter. The role is 24/7, and while she is reluctant to use external carers, she is also prevented from drawing down direct payments to top up her carer's allowance. Jackie's money doesn't match that of her daughter's PIP, so is often left without enough money for both of them to do things such as social activities and hobbies. Katie cares for her husband, who is MND, plus her mother and mother-in-law, who both have caring needs. Katie spoke of the challenge of making ends meet, only surviving because of her husband's PIP and a small ill health-related pension. Despite caring for 3 people, Katie is only allowed 1 carer's allowance payment, as per the rules. The current allowance barely covers the basic costs of living, let alone the additional expenses incurred during the unpredictable challenges of caring for someone with disabilities or chronic illnesses. From medical bills to specialised equipment and everyday essentials, the financial burden on caregivers is overwhelming. Many are forced to make impossible choices between putting food on the table and accessing services. Furthermore, the eligibility criteria for carers' allowance are unduly restrictive, leaving out a significant portion of caregivers who are equally deserving of support. The requirement for caregivers to provide at least 35 hours of care per week effectively excludes those who juggle caregiving responsibilities with part-time employment or other commitments. This arbitrary threshold denies assistance to individuals who are in dire need of financial relief. Perhaps the Minister would like to explain how the 35 hours of care criteria was arrived at. The narrative surrounding carers' allowance is often toxic, with carers being treated as undeserving at best and criminals at worst. The recent news coverage of people being fined or charged with benefit fraud because of accidental overpayments or honest mistakes, sometimes concerning as little as a few £100s, throws a spotlight on this. Such action is neither fair nor proportional. Carers' allowance is the lowest paid benefit of its kind. These examples say something of the value put upon carers and speak of a society and its government that simply do not value care. Support for carers should go well beyond carers' allowance. Stakeholders such as care charities and think tanks have told me of diminishing support for carers during recent years, citing the lack of availability of respite care and training opportunities as examples of a crumbling support network. It is suggested that any reform should centre on providing support for carers to remain in work where possible. This will involve financial support, but also flexibility in how carers' allowance is paid to avoid a threshold cliff edge. In addition, the threshold itself needs to be raised and tied to the periodic uprating of any minimum or living wage. Across the UK, 600 carers per day give up work without having a choice. In December 2022, Carers UK highlighted that the earnings limit for carers' allowance is not keeping pace with the national living wage. They said, over the last 4 years, the number of hours carers have been able to work alongside receiving carers' allowance has shrunk from just under 15 hours a week in 2019 to roughly 13 hours and 20 minutes from April 2023. This represents a loss of 1 hour 40 minutes a week. Over a year, this amounts to a loss of 12 days of paid work.
Will she give way?
I'm delighted to give way.
congratulate my colleague from the Petitions Committee for presenting this petition so clearly. She's talking about the money, the carers allowance not meeting the costs. Is she aware, as I am from my own constituents, that the cost of living crisis and things like food prices going up is actually making it acutely difficult, and perhaps more difficult now than it was a few years ago?
My honourable friend makes a very important intervention and a very important point which I completely agree with. And this can only highlight the plight of unpaid carers. So whilst carers can work any amount of hours, they must not exceed the earnings limit, which then effectively limits the hours they can work. It is important to understand that the problem of in-work support is one of implementation, not legislation. Laws exist which provide the framework for support for carers in employment, but all too often we see examples where that support is simply not implemented properly at an employer level. That said, the policy for carers allowance needs to be far more inclusive. Caring isn't just about older people. The 21-hour rule on study is arbitrary and discriminatory. Financial support should be stronger, clearer, and less at the discretion of grant decision makers. There is also no clarity on who is responsible for any policy failure, neither at civil service nor ministerial level. It is everyone and it is no one. Finally, work must be done to end the postcode lottery and level up the services available in poorer areas. There are stark inequalities across the different regions as to how the carers assessment for young carers is delivered. There are huge disparities in whether a GP surgery provides information on support for carers or not, and there is a significant gap between the number of people who identify as carers and those registered as a carer with their GP. We need to answer the question of what is carers allowance for. A recent survey reported that 48% of those in receipt of it say it doesn't make the difference that it should. Any reforms must examine the level of carers allowance so that it better reflects the level of financial impact of caring responsibilities. Increase the earnings limit and tie it to national living wage increases. Review the 21-hour study rule. Aggregate the total number of caring hours if someone is caring for more than one person, so that their allowance accurately reflects their caring responsibilities. Explore the option of a sliding scale of payments, depending on the level of caring responsibilities, supporting those who wish to stay in work. Modernise carers' allowance processes to guard against accidental overpayments and treat honest mistakes compassionately, fairly and proportionately. Provide an additional payment for carers of state pension age. Such reforms would help bridge the gap between the current state of things and how we might wish them to be. To conclude, Madam Chair, carers' allowance fails to adequately address the long-term implications of caregiving on the mental and physical well-being of caregivers. The emotional toll of caring for a loved one can be profound, leading to increased stress, anxiety and burnout. Without sufficient support, caregivers risk their own health and well-being, perpetuating a cycle of hardship and suffering. We cannot turn a blind eye to the injustices faced by caregivers across our nation. It is incumbent upon us as a society to rectify these inadequacies and provide meaningful support to those who dedicate their lives to caring for others. Whilst I appreciate the difficulties and dangers of paying carers a minimum wage, we must demand a carers allowance that reflects the true value of caregiving, a fair and dignified allowance that alleviates financial hardship and recognises the invaluable contributions of caregivers to our society. Let us stand in solidarity with caregivers and advocate for meaningful change. I urge government and policymakers to reform carers' allowance and reinvigorate all support to ensure that it serves its intended purpose of providing genuine help for those who need it most. Together we can build a more compassionate and inclusive society where caregivers are valued, respected and adequately supported. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The question is that this House has considered e-petition 640062 relating to carers' allowance. Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mrs. Elliott. Can I congratulate the Honourable Member for Neath, both for bringing this e-petition to the House and for her excellent speech. And I agree with everything that she said. Mrs. Elliott, in coming to a debate on carers' allowance, I think we should first of all look at the big picture issues that carers' allowance helps us address, but at the moment, very inadequately. First of all, the issue of social justice. Carers are working often long hours in very difficult, trying circumstances, and they receive the lowest benefit of the lot. And they are treated as if they don't matter. That has to change, both in terms of the values we place on care, but also to end income inequality. Supporting care properly through carers' allowance would make a big difference, I think, in a proper social justice agenda. But it's much more than that, actually. It's also about the link between care and the NHS. Carers do such a fantastic job. They help the NHS and the taxpayer in the work that they do. They save the NHS and the taxpayer billions of pounds. But for family carers, unpaid carers, or carers receiving this very limited allowance, the NHS would literally fall over. So we absolutely have to see this debate about carers' allowance in the context of social justice and the future of the NHS. But there's another issue which I hope the Minister will particularly look at, and that's the link with the economic problems we face today. The DWP is looking at, we are told, the need to help people get back into work. Well, there are a lot of people who can't get back into work because they're caring. They'd like to work more, but then if they work more, they get penalised. That's what I want to come to, because it's clearly an issue of the day, which I know the Chairman of the Select Committee is going to address. And so if the government is worried about work incentives, if the government is worried about making sure there's people there to do the jobs that we need, they should be looking at this. The level of carers' allowance, but all the conditions and criteria that are around it. It is way overdue for reform. So, Mrs. Elliott, I start my remarks by those general issues. Before we get down to the basics, as the Honourable Member for Neath quite rightly took us, I think there is a need to have a complete review of carers' allowance. The rate it's paid at, the conditions around it, how it relates to other benefits and other issues. Let me give you one or two examples. The issues of age. You know, people, as the Honourable Lady said, who are in education, with the 21-hour rule, can't do it. Now, that's discriminating against young people. And young carers need support even arguably more than any other form of carers. And so the interaction between education, and I would even go below 16, actually, because some young carers are basically doing a full-time job as well as their GCSEs and their studies. We need to look at that. We need to look at it for people over their pension age. The last Labour government, to do credit to it, began to do that. But I think we need to take that further, because some pensioners are working incredibly hard and doing really stressful jobs and are ineligible for carers' allowance. So we need, I think, Mrs. Elliott, a full-scale review of carers' allowance, and we need that urgently. But to address the overpayment issue, which I think is really worrying, there are two aspects of that we have to address. One is the legacy, all this carers' allowance that apparently has been overpaid and that the government is looking to claw back. I think that's a big legacy issue which we need to look at, and I'd like to ask the Minister some questions about that, because it's clearly an issue which you've all got to face up to and try and tackle. And then there's the issue of trying to stop the overpayments coming up in the first place. So the question I'd like to ask the Minister, and I've seen a number of reports and parliamentary answers on this, but I've never not quite nailed it down to satisfaction, is how much money does the DWP believe has been overpaid and is yet to be clawed back from people who have paid overpaid carers allowance? What's the figure? What's the debt? We've seen different amounts. What's the cumulative total going back however many years that the DWP is worried about? How big is this problem, in other words? Give us a size to it so we can try and get a feel for it. So how much is owed? And the people who were overpaid, how much were they being overpaid? Because I've seen figures from the Carers UK and some parliamentary answers that the vast bulk relates to people who are overpaid just a little bit, £2 a week. And because of the cliff edge, they have to pay the whole stuff, the whole amount. And if they've been overpaid by an average of £2 a week for a year, they're having to pay back the whole lot. I mean, the cliff edge problem is creating an absolute total injustice, and everyone can see that on all sides. So let's have some more figures from the government. Let's have some more transparency so we can understand this. And I hope the Minister can go into more detail. For example, how many of the people who are overpaid did the DWP know were being overpaid and they didn't alert them? Because we read in the press that the DWP is aware of this sometimes and for whatever reason doesn't notify them. Now, trying to claim back money from someone who you've overpaid, they weren't aware of it, but you were and you didn't tell them. I mean, there's something really wrong there, Mrs. Elliott, to compound the errors. So we need to really understand some of this information, and I hope the Minister's got it at her fingertips, because we really need to if we're going to come to a view about how we deal with this huge problem of the overpayments legacy. I don't think there'll be a single member of this House or the other place who thinks it's right to pursue some of these overpayments for some of these people. It really beggars belief in many cases. And my final point, Mrs. Elliott, goes to the fact that overpayments are still happening on a regular systemic basis. Because of the cliff edge problem, which the Honourable Member for Neath quite rightly touched on, it's happening by accident every single day. And the government, as the Honourable Members mentioned, was warned about this. There was a National Audit Office report in 2019. The government admitted it was a problem. The government said it was going to fix it. And here we are, and it's not been fixed, and it's got worse. So we do need to understand how the government is going to address this to make sure this problem just doesn't even get worse and worse and doesn't keep re-occurring. You know, we read that it's a terrible big IT system. It's going to cost millions to fix to get the IT system right. Well, why should carers be penalised because the government can't get its systems right? That doesn't look right to me. The government's got to sort it out, and in the meantime, treat carers fairly. So, Mrs. Elliott, I'm really keen to hear others in their contributions. I just hope that we can come together on this, realise that carers are getting a raw deal, that it's bad for inequality, bad for the NHS, bad for our economy, and we urgently need first a fix to deal with the problems we have at the moment, but then a long-term fix so this is sorted out once and for all.
Sir Stephen Timms.
Thank you very much. I want to congratulate my old friend for opening this important debate on behalf of the Petitions Committee in the very good way in which she did that. And it's a pleasure to serve with you and the Chair, Ms Elliott. The Work and Pensions Select Committee is taking a very close interest in the discussions around carers allowance. I'm delighted to see my honourable friend, the member for Oldham East and Saddleworth here. She's taken a lot of interest in this. But I have a particular personal interest in this debate because my constituency accounts for the largest number of signatures on the petition, 73. So I thought it was particularly important for me to be here. But as others have said, for the best part of 2 decades now, the Work and Pensions Committee and its predecessors have been calling on the government to reform carers' allowance, including the rate at which it's paid. There was a 2008 Select Committee report valuing and supporting carers, which concluded that carers' allowance was outdated, should be radically overhauled at the earliest opportunity to recognise the contribution that carers make. Well, that earliest opportunity still hasn't arrived. Challenges raised in that report remain unaddressed 16 years later. We know that the Department has conducted research to support policy development on carers' allowance. The Department promised in the response to a 2019 Select Committee report to publish that research. It's never been published. We still haven't seen it. And so I wonder whether the Minister and the Select Committee is looking forward very much to hearing on Wednesday from the Minister about carers' allowance specifically, whether the Minister will tell us when the policy development will conclude and whether the research will finally, as promised in 2019, be published. As we've heard, Ms Elliott, carers' allowance is paid at a weekly rate of £81.90, less than other income replacement benefits, job seeker allowances, nearly £10 a week more. In my committee's inquiry, recent inquiry on benefit levels in the UK, we heard that carers' allowance was paid at too low a rate and that carers often had to cut back on food, were struggling to make ends meet as a result. And last month, in a one-off evidence session we had on carers' allowance, we heard from Terry Curtin, a full-time carer for his father, and he said of caring and of receiving carers' allowance, and I quote his words to the committee, "I'm tired of struggling. I want to be able to look after my father. I want to make sure he doesn't have to go without things, and I would like to be able to have a bit of a life myself without having to fight with my finances every day." And I wonder whether the Minister, and I know the Minister has substantial personal experience herself of caring, whether she recognises that the rate of carers' allowance today is just not enough. Terry, who gave evidence to us, is a registered nurse by profession. To retain his registration, he would have to work a certain number of hours per week. But if he did that, it would take him over the carers' allowance earnings limit. So it's impossible for him to maintain his registration and to continue to receive carers' allowance. To balance his caring role and his finances, he's had to leave the profession, give up work altogether and care for his father. He now just about survives on carers' allowance. So that brings me to the second challenge, the earnings limit for carers' allowance. In the same session of our committee, we heard how the earnings limit in carers' allowance acts as a disincentive for carers who would like to work, either because they would be worse off financially, should they lose carers' allowance because of their work, or due to fears that they would accidentally go over the limit. And this is a really big problem, that they'd accidentally slip over the limit for carers' allowance, giving rise to the overpayments that we've just been hearing about, because the earnings limit effectively traps carers in low-paid work only, whatever their skills or their training. The earnings limit in carers' allowance is not increased in line with the national minimum wage. We've been told rightly already by my honourable friend, the member for Neath, that the Carers UK has pointed out that the number of hours a carer has been able to work at the national living wage while also receiving carers' allowance has decreased over the last few years. And our report called on the government to commit to uprating carers' allowance, to uprating the earnings threshold for carers' allowance annually. There should be a commitment to increase it every year. Now, this very similar point was made in the 2019 report, and in its response, the government said that it would look at the findings from the research, which I've referred to, with an open mind, consider any changes to the earnings limit to be a priority. But since then, nothing has happened. So I wonder if the Minister can tell us today whether there are plans to review how to increase the earnings limit in carers allowance. For example, linking increases each year with rises to the national living wage. We've also heard, rightly, that the earnings limit is just one of several eligibility restrictions, and another is the 21-hour rule. That prevents carers in full-time education who are in 21 hours or more of education a week from claiming carers allowance. And Carers UK made the point to our committee last month, if you're a young adult carer, you have to choose between getting education and qualifications and getting some financial support. They added, that is not right. It will affect people for the rest of their lives. And I wonder if the department has looked at the effect of that 21-hour rule specifically on young carers, on young adult carers, including on their opportunities later in life. The restriction on learning and caring is being lifted, we understand, in Scotland, with obvious advantages for young carers. And my final concern, Ms Elliott, is overpayments, and we've touched on this already, featuring in recent news reports. It is not a new issue. Our predecessor committee published a report on it, specifically on this, in 2019, and data from the department shows that in the year 2022-23, the department was pursuing over 30,000 overpayments of up to £2,000 and over 7,000 payments over £2,000, including 36 overpayments of more than £20,000. Now, how has the department allowed overpayments clearly covering, in some cases, quite a few years, to accumulate? The department knows from HMRC real-time information what people are earning, and it can stop payment of carers allowance to those who are no longer eligible. And indeed, the response to the 2019 report, the government's response to that report, confirmed there is an automatic notification when weekly net pay exceeds the carers allowance earnings limit. And yet the department does nothing, allowing people to build up instead these huge overpayments, and then it prosecutes them. Now, that surely cannot be right to carry on in that way. I recognise the Minister may not have the detailed data for the 2023-24 year, as we've been given with 22-23, but it would be very helpful if she could ask officials to provide that to the committee in the coming weeks. So, Ms Elliott, I very much look forward to the Minister's response and also to her appearance before the committee on Wednesday, where we will have an opportunity to explore these issues in further detail.
Margaret Greenwood. Chairmanship this afternoon, and I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Neath, on leading this really important debate on behalf of the Petition Committee. I would also like to thank my constituents in Wirral West who've signed the petition that we're debating today, which calls on the government to increase the amount of carers allowance to match pay for a full-time job. Unpaid carers provide vital support for those they care for, be it a family member, a friend or a neighbour, and they make a huge contribution to our society in general. It is therefore really important that they're valued properly. As the petition points out, many unpaid carers have to give up work to provide care, and being a carer can also have a significant impact on carers' well-being and lifestyle. Census data suggests there are around 5.7 million unpaid carers across the UK. However, research from Carers UK in 2022 estimated that the true number of unpaid carers could be as high as 10.6 million. It is thought that 1 in 7 people in the workplace in the UK are juggling work and care. We know that many unpaid carers have faced enormous pressure on their personal finances as a result of the cost of living crisis. This has caused stress and anxiety for them, and many have been forced to cut back on essentials, things like food and heating. Some have suffered extremely severe financial hardship. According to the Carers UK website, 44% of working-age adults who are caring for 35 hours or more a week are living in poverty. Carers UK have highlighted research from Petrillo and Bennett, which shows that unpaid carers in England and Wales contribute a staggering £445 million to the economy every day. That is £162 billion per year. That's a huge amount of money. And as things stand, unpaid carers can get £81.90 a week if they care for someone for at least 35 hours a week and that person receives certain benefits. It is therefore unsurprising that there are calls right across the country for a significant increase in this. The Carer Poverty Coalition, set up by Carers UK and made up of over 130 national and local organisations coming together to campaign to end poverty amongst carers, has said that the next government must commission a full review into carers' allowance and its eligibility rules to ensure that it adequately values and supports carers. They say that the review should include, among other things, increasing the level of carers' allowance so that it better reflects the level of financial penalty carers incur, exploring different payments for people, providing 20, 35 and 50 plus hours of care to take account for the intensity of caring, the provision of an additional payment for carers of state pension age, and the scrapping of the 21-hour study rule, which stops anyone who is studying for more than that amount of time a week from claiming carers' allowance. These are all very reasonable and important aspects that should be included in such a review. I would also, in particular, call for an end to the cliff edge situation, which faces carers who are also in paid employment. At the moment, someone can only receive carers' allowance if they earn £151 a week or less after tax, national insurance and expenses. If they go over that amount, even by 1 penny, they lose their entire benefit entitlement. This is leading to a situation where there are carers who are unwittingly going over the limit and so becoming ineligible to continue claiming the benefit. This will be particularly the case right now as the national minimum wage has gone up this month, and I urge carers to check their entitlement as a matter of urgency. I would also ask the Minister, what is the government doing to ensure that all carers in paid employment are aware of this? Written parliamentary questions that I tabled last week have revealed that currently the government is seeking to recover a total of 156,300 carers' allowance overpayments. That's over 10,000 more than at roughly the same point when I asked this information last year. The vast majority, more than 58%, of these are for amounts up to £1,000. The 300 cases are for amounts over £20,000. That the government has failed to get a grip on this over the last year is shameful. They are leaving increasing numbers of carers facing mounting debts without taking the necessary action to stop this. It was revealed in the press earlier this month that tens of thousands of unpaid carers looking after disabled, frail or ill relatives are being forced to repay huge sums to the government and threatened with criminal prosecution after unwittingly breaching earnings rulings by just a few pounds a week. However, many of these, whilst of course there may be some cases of fraud, and of course they always have to be investigated, many of these cases will be human error, without a doubt. Lots of people struggle to navigate the claims system, and many carers are under considerable pressure caring for someone they love. Some carers may also have their own medical issues to manage on top of their caring, which adds pressure, causes stress and makes them vulnerable. And I also remind the Minister that there are 7 million functionally illiterate adults in this country. Yeah. So for them to navigate the system is sort of well-nigh impossible. The government has said to me that it seeks to recover money without causing excessive hardship, but the experience of many carers clearly shows the opposite is true. There have been reports that the DWP has warned carers they could face greater penalties if they appeal against fines. Government officials have been accused of using threatening and cruel tactics in this regard. This is truly shameful, and I hope that the Minister will look into these allegations. There have been reports too of carers becoming severely depressed, suicidal and self-harming due to the government's abhorrent approach after being ordered to pay money back after mistakenly breaching the earnings allowance. This is a completely unacceptable state of affairs. Social security systems should be there to support people, not to cause them stress and push some to suicide. It is true too that the sheer complexity of the claims system can lead carers into making honest mistakes. As the judge said in one case of a woman who was prosecuted after being overpaid carers' allowance when taking a part-time job on minimum wage, he said the defendant had limited understanding of the offence she had committed. The cliff edge of £151 can have the effect too of providing a disincentive for carers to be and to stay in work. That is in absolutely nobody's interest at all. Aside from the financial support that it provides for them, it also gives people a sense of agency within their local community and identity, and can be vital for people's mental health and well-being. It's also important for people who are caring for people who may be approaching end of life, because of course when the person that they care for passes away, that carer may then want to re-engage in full-time employment. It's so much easier to get work when you're already in work and when your skill level has been maintained. So clearly that is something that needs to be included as part of any review, and so too are the long waits that carers are reported experiencing when they contact the Carers Allowance unit by telephone for information about the benefit and how to make a claim. Labour has committed to reviewing the system of carers allowance, and we need this government to make that same commitment as a matter of urgency, and along with that it needs to review the level of carers allowance. As things stand, too many carers are not getting the support that they need. In summary, it is very evident that there needs to be a large-scale review of carers' allowance and that the levels of payments that unpaid carers receive need to be increased. Work must be done to tackle the issue of overpayments. The government should provide more staff to help clear the backlog of looking into possible overpayment cases and use those automated systems that are available to them. And we need to see an end to the cliff edge that renders someone ineligible as soon as they go a penny over to qualify. Unpaid carers need to be recognised for the vitally important and selfless work that they do. They need to be supported and not punished for looking after their loved ones.
Beth Winter.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, Mr. It is an honour to serve and to be and I'd also like to congratulate and thank my honourable friend from Nice for leading this important debate today. And it really is an important debate in providing an opportunity to recognise the invaluable contribution that millions of unpaid carers provide to their loved ones, to our society and to our economy, but also to note the continued failure of the carers allowance system to recompense that. I wish to speak in support of some of the policy demands of representatives of unpaid carers, including those set out by Carers UK, and to ask the Minister if this government will now commit to meeting those demands. If it is the case that they cannot do so, I know the country and the carers community will be looking to the Labour frontbench to come the next election. Carers UK says that across the UK there are over 10.6 million people providing unpaid care. And they really are vulnerable, increasingly vulnerable, to falling into poverty and financial difficulties. And we've already heard there is at least a third of carers living in poverty. And those doing the longest hours are more likely to be struggling to make ends meet. 44% of working-age adults who are providing unpaid care for more than 35 hours a week are in poverty, according to Carers UK. And they estimate the value of unpaid care provided by carers was estimated, as my honourable friends already indicated, at £162 billion per year in England and Wales. And the ONS has estimated that in my constituency there are over 10,000 carers providing 19 hours or less unpaid care. And
Sitting suspended for 25 minutes for revisions to take place
In the House. That's right, isn't it? Yeah. So what time is that? I've got to be back.
The sitting is resumed. The debate may now continue until 7:55. That is dependent on no more votes, of course. Beth Winter.
Yes, like many other members here, I have lots of constituents who are carers who come to us for assistance. One of them, who's been a carer for his wife, following a diagnosis of schizophrenia for more than 40 years. He's now a pensioner with low income, but that impacts significantly on his entitlements to carers allowance. And another constituent cares for a grandfather, and she had her carers allowance revoked for exceeding the income threshold and due to a period of financial difficulty and mental health impacts before we intervened, when the DWP actually confirmed that her payments should not have stopped, and she did receive over £1,000 back. And I do worry how many carers do not access support and advice and may be underpaid significantly, as well as the issue with regards to overpayments. There are a large proportion of people who do not claim the benefits that they are entitled to. So only 71% of carers allowance claimants in 2023 were receiving a payment, and the remaining approximately 400,000 claimants met the conditions set out above, but were not receiving this benefit due to the overlapping benefit rule, including nearly all pensioner carers, which I know other honourable members have mentioned earlier. So the petition today that we are discussing asks the carers allowance is raised to the rate of 35 hours per week at the level of national minimum wage. This would equate to £400 per week. The government's response says carers allowance is, and I quote, a benefit that provides some financial recognition that a carer may not be able to work full time. But should someone earn more than the £151 per week, they lose all access to carers allowance. And this is the cliff edge situation that others have mentioned today. This is only around 13 hours work at adult national minimum wage, and the number of minimum wage hours that can be worked before hitting the threshold has declined in recent years. This is completely inadequate, but also unacceptable, and is in need of urgent reform. And that is why the government must commit to improving carers' allowance. Now, I've previously spoken in the House about how the Work and Pensions Committee has called for an increased earnings limit and the introduction of a tape, and we've got the chair here today of that committee who has spoken about it in much more detail. And I've also said the uprating of a carers' allowance needs to be synchronised with the real living wage. Carers UK have set out a number of demands ahead of the election. They urge an increase in the earnings limit for carers allowance to the value of 21 hours per week at the national living wage rate, and define this link in law so carers' ability to earn is not eroded over time. This would take the earnings threshold to £240, where it is currently £151. And they also urge reform to the eligibility rules for carers' allowance, including ending the cliff edge, giving access to a tapered rate for those working more hours each week, enabling more than one person to receive the benefit if multiple people are caring for the same person, and extending the run-on payments for bereaved carers from 8 to 12 weeks. And I think, most importantly, they urge the government to carry out a full review of the link between caring and poverty across the UK and commission an independent inquiry to explore longer-term solutions to bring in more unpaid carers out of poverty. The Carer Poverty Coalition says the carers' allowance itself should be increased, and that is vital from speaking to many carers in my constituency. The current rate is undoubtedly a poverty payment, and the earnings threshold cliff edge makes a mockery of social justice. The reality is many carers work full-time as a carer, and the state refuses to recognise this financial benefit to society, as well as the invaluable contribution the carers make. The idea of earning a minimum wage for a full-time job has been long accepted, and we should do the same for those people caring. In conclusion, I just wanted to comment more generally on the demonisation of people who are receiving social security benefits, which is an entitlement. It is a right. And more recently, that has been demonstrated by the Prime Minister's comments about, and I quote, a sick note culture, which are dangerous and absolutely disgraceful comments, which will do nothing except for exacerbate people's hardship that they experience. And this demonisation and stigmatisation of claimants, including millions of carers, must stop. And as an example, in my constituency of Cynnon Valley, we do have high rates of social security claimants, including people in receipt of carers allowance. Sorry? Are we on again?
Another division was suspended for 15 minutes.
Sorry.
Order. The sitting is now resumed and this debate will now continue up until 8:20. I call on Beth Winter.
So as well as carers allowance currently being a poverty payment and in need of fundamental reform, I was going to conclude with a few general comments regarding social security and carers benefits and assistance more generally. Firstly, the demonisation of people in receipt of social security benefits, which is an entitlement, should stop. We had Sunak saying only last week about a sick note culture, language which is inflammatory, disgraceful and very, very dangerous. And will only exacerbate people's hardship. And in Cynon Valley, we do have high levels of people on social security benefits, including carers allowance. That is due to our industrial legacy, dirty work where people have inherited quite significant ill health associated to the industries in which they work. And with the decimation of the industries, we've got high rates of unemployment. And that again has been compounded by the cost of living crisis, which is a political choice. We also, therefore, need, in terms of carers, structural, transformational change to ensure that everybody, regardless of their circumstances, are treated with respect, dignity and receive the support that they are entitled to. And that should include a new national carers strategy. We haven't had one, a new one for apparently 16 years, which I found quite shocking. We could include carers as a protected characteristic in the Equality Act, enhance flexible working and introduce statutory rights to break for people with caring responsibilities, and ensure that social care receives sustainable and adequate funding, and that there's a joined up approach between health and social care, so the social care stops being seen as the weak relation in many regards. And sustainable funding would ensure that people could have respite care and other support services, both for the carers and the person receiving the care. And we should be exploring things like minimum income guarantee and universal basic income. But without a doubt, the overwhelming evidence shows that as a starting point, carers allowance is in need of fundamental reform. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Ms Cummington. It's a pleasure to speak in this debate with you in the chair, and I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Neath, on leading this important debate. Many charities, campaigners and carers themselves have called for years for a wide-ranging reform of carers allowance. The petition we are debating today focuses specifically on how much carers allowance should offer carers, so I want to begin with the financial pressures facing carers. Carers UK estimates that over a quarter of carers live in poverty, and this rises to nearly half of those carers who care for more than 35 hours a week. Often people in receipt of carers allowance face particularly difficult financial situations. The poverty rate for people in receipt of carers allowance has doubled in the last decade, and a survey by Carers UK shows that 45% of people receiving carers allowance are struggling to make ends meet, and that's a significant increase on the previous year. The causes of financial difficulty for carers are frequently linked to their caring responsibilities. Carers, of course, face additional costs which are unavoidable for keeping the person they care for safe. So costs can include vital high-energy equipment, the cost of additional laundry and bathing needs, and transport costs for visits to medical appointments. Carers, as we've heard already in this debate, also have a limited ability to earn an income. If they are in receipt of carers allowance, they can only earn £151 before losing the benefit. This month, the earnings threshold for claiming carers allowance increased below the national living wage, which means that carers on the lowest wages will have to cut back their hours to just over 13 hours a week, or risk losing the benefit. For some, this will be equivalent of losing 13 days of work a year, a substantial loss. And there is, as we've already heard, but I think it's worth repeating, an issue for carers who are in full-time education, young carers, because they lose eligibility for carers allowance when they study for more than 21 hours a week. And many young people are therefore excluded from support. These and other eligibility requirements limit the support carers can receive through carers allowance. But most importantly, around 34% of carers in receipt of carers allowance are still in poverty, So clearly, carers allowance is failing to give enough financial support to the people who provide unpaid care to others. It's therefore ridiculous, I feel, for the government to claim in response to this petition that they recognise the invaluable contribution that unpaid and family carers make, when clearly so many carers are not getting the support they need. The petition we're debating today focuses on the amount available for carers through the carers allowance, but there are other issues which should warrant our concern. A particularly worrying problem that we've already heard in this debate is the recent reporting of overpayments of carers allowance and the subsequent repayment penalties. As we have heard, poor systems or poor processes at the Department of Work and Pensions have resulted in 145,000 current cases of overpayments to unpaid carers, with 12,000 of these being for amounts over £5,000. And as we've seen reported in the press recently, this has resulted in thousands of carers running up huge debts, being given criminal records and being forced to sell their own homes when chased by DWP over small mistakes which officials could have spotted years earlier. For example, George Henderson is the carer of his adult son, John, who has a learning disability. Mr. Henderson was overpaid £110 and ended up being prosecuted for benefit fraud by the Department of Work and Pensions, despite the department admitting that his was an innocent mistake. He was forced to sell his house and threatened monthly with jail. Then he tried to take his own life. Mr. Henderson told the Mirror that one night I'd had a drink and I put a noose up in the loft. My girlfriend rang the crisis team and I was under them for 4 months. They wouldn't let me live alone. I lost 4 stone as I couldn't eat. I look at photos from that time and you can see my rib cage. The repercussions of this time continue to affect Mr. Henderson, and he is now waiting to undergo therapy for PTSD. Sadly, there are many other carers like Mr. Henderson. One carer told Carers UK that the whole process had my wife so stressed out that she, at several points, contemplated suicide. She couldn't see an end to it, and as it turned out, we didn't end up owing the DWP anything. Carers have described suffering an avalanche of utter stress due to the government's claiming back of these benefits. And this is not about mistakes or misunderstandings by carers, as we've heard. This is about administrative failures at DWP and harsh penalties for people who the government should be trying to support. There must be a change to the processing around carers allowance to alleviate that acute distress and financial hardship that overpayments can cause. Otherwise, we will be seeing many more serious headlines, because it is reported that 1 in 3 unpaid carers have thought about killing themselves due to the emotional financial strain they're under. That is disturbing, and it's also disturbing that it's not known how many carers have already been driven to suicide, because caring status is not part of the data collected after such a death. It's unacceptable, in my view, that the government has let this mismanagement of carers allowance processes go on for so long. Both the Work and Pensions Select Committee and the National Audit Office warned of this situation 5 years ago, yet the number of overpayments today remains just as high. I'm glad that Labour has committed to reviewing the system of carers allowance and would look to reform DWP policy on carers allowance. But carers should not have to wait, now that these issues are really being exposed, for a general election to see action on this. So, Ms Cummings, the government must sort out this mess urgently so that unpaid carers are no longer penalised for the vital care they offer.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to see you in the chair of this committee. And can I start by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Neath, for bringing this debate to the Chamber and for her excellent speech. I absolutely agree with her that carers are not just the backbone of society, but they represent the best of us in terms of the selflessness that they display. We should be championing them, and of course that we know that that's not happening. Last week, many of you will have seen Oxfam's report on carers, which is called Valued, which is a little bit of a contradiction because it gives case study after case study of where people aren't valued, where it just shows how little people and society as a whole do value them. But as my other honourable friend, the member for Wirral West, has shared, the cost, the savings that they give to society, £165 billion a year, if we were actually able to pay carers. That is the cost that they actually save. I just want to make a few points. Many have already been made. First of all, in terms of the adequacy and the lack of adequacy around carers' allowance. And as we've already heard, a quarter of those caring for loved ones are living in poverty. The issue around the rules, both in terms of the cliff edge and the earnings limit, but also the administration of that room, a lack of common sense, but also compassion. And I quite frankly find that unforgivable. Young carers, I work very closely with young carers in my public health days, and as we've already heard, given the statement and the speech that was given by the Prime Minister last week about the impact of mental health on young people and the poor mental health so many young people are experiencing, you'd think that there would be a message about the impact on young carers that this is having on them. Many as young as 8 or 9 who actually are caring for their parents or their siblings. It really is appalling. I had a glimpse of being a carer. My mother had Alzheimer's disease for 10 years, and I provided support to my stepfather, who cared for her during that time. We weren't reliant on carers' allowance, but the strain it puts on you, the real strain it puts on you day in, day out, throughout 24/7, you know, it is a really significant gift that people give to their loved ones, but to society as a whole. So we've heard in terms of the inadequacy around carers' allowance, £81.90 a week, the lowest level compared to even job seekers' allowance. And again, refer you to the report that the Select Committee has published on benefit levels in the UK. I think we have the lowest level of out-of-work support since 1911. It's just, so if we think that carers' allowance is even less than that in real terms, it's just appalling. We've been doing a mini inquiry. We've got a follow-up session on Wednesday, which I know the Minister is attending. But if you want to hear, the experience of people who are caring for loved ones now, then do reflect on the evidence that they gave a couple of weeks ago. And then we've also heard about the appalling treatment by the Department for Work and Pensions, absolute lack of compassion that has been shown to people who make often innocent mistakes, who are then criminalised by the DWP for this, and you know, the draconian treatment that they receive. I feel quite ashamed, to be honest, that's happening. The problem with overpayment, as we've heard, is exacerbated by the unfair cliff edge, and as I say, the administration of these ridiculous rules, which really do need reforming. I just want to mention, I was contacted by a medical advisor, a former a retired GP, who's providing medical advice to first-tier tribunals, to appeals for PIP, but who also happened to be in receipt of carers' allowance. And this retired GP contacted me because she was concerned over the last 6 months of the statement that the department was providing in her bundle, which was basically saying, well, I'll read it out because she's given me a section of it. She says, although Miss X has identified a high level of personal restriction, she is entitled to carers' allowance. To be entitled to carers' allowance, a person must provide at least 35 hours of care to another disabled person each week. The tribunal may wish to explore this further. So although it may not look particularly threatening, as it stands alone, taken in the context of other arguments the department are looking to put forward, it's basically saying, how can you be caring for somebody if you're also disabled? That's what it's saying. And that was the gist, unfortunately, of the Prime Minister's speech last week as well. If you're genuinely in receipt of Social Security, of course we'll support you. But there's the question mark about how many, what proportion of people in receipt of Social Security are genuine. And that really gets to the core and makes me quite angry. Most people have worked, most people are doing the right thing. To infer and imply that they are not genuine is a disgrace, an absolute disgrace. So I do hope the Minister, when she, in her response, can respond to, and perhaps the officials that are there as well, of why those sort of statements would be included in a bundle to a medical advisor on the first-tier tribunal, which is actually questioning, as I say, somebody who's caring for somebody else who also happens to be in receipt of disability benefits. Thank you, Ms Cummins.
For the SNP, I call Marion Fellows.
Thank you, Ms Cummins, and it's a real pleasure to serve under your chairship. And I want to congratulate the Honourable Member for Neath on the way she introduced this very important petitions debate. I'm grateful as well to be able to speak in this important debate through my role as SNP spokesperson for disabilities and the SNP Carers Champion. I've had the pleasure of engaging with disabled people, their carers and carers organisations over the last number of years, and it really has been a privilege. I engage with my engagement with them stunned me at first as I concentrated on the disabilities aspect of my role, and then went into a drop-in in Parliament and spent an hour and a half listening to carers and got more involved on that side of things. Carers play such an invaluable role, and the impact they have on the lives of those for which they care is almost unquantifiable. They show the best of humanity and are truly altruistic people who devote much or all of their time to others, but they're not properly recompensed by this government. Before we get into the cold numbers and economic arguments for increasing carers' allowance on a human level, I want to pay tribute to carers right across the UK and thank them for all that they do. Carers ought to finally get the recognition they deserve, as for too long they have been unsupported, exploited and taken for granted. The work of unpaid carers is what holds society together. According to Carers UK, there are an estimated 5.7 million people in the UK that provide unpaid care, accounting for 9% of the population. I want to also give a special thanks to Carers Together North Lanarkshire and Lanarkshire Carers and NL Young Carers for all the help and support they give to unpaid carers in Motherwell and Wishaw, and to all those other local organisations across the UK. Each and any one of us can and potentially will become a carer or be cared for by someone at some point in our lives. None of us can predict the future. Circumstances change, and before we know it, we may be caring for or receiving care from a loved one. Each year, around 4.3 million people become unpaid carers. That is 12,000 people a day. Unpaid carer support is worth a staggering £162 billion a year in the UK. Let me repeat that, £162 billion a year. According to the Carers Trust, the value of unpaid care is £12.8 billion per year in Scotland alone. The figures are huge. The importance of unpaid carers in our economy is enormous, yet carers feel unsupported. 3 in 5 are worried about living costs, 600 have to give up work every single day, and a quarter of carers have either bad or very bad mental health. The enormous contribution unpaid carers make to the economy makes it all the more shocking that carers are under-supported in the UK. This has further been reflected in the recent evidence given to the Work and Pensions Committee in March. in a session on carers allowance. Representatives from Carers UK, Carers Scotland and the Centre for Social Justice all agreed that carers allowance is inadequate, and each of the organisations took issue with the earnings limit. It was noted unanimously by these organisations that UK lags behind comparable jurisdictions, most of whom linked the earnings limit to hours worked and not how much a person earns, thereby not confining people to low-wage work. Ahead of today's debate, a number of organisations have been in touch to highlight to me the dire situation that carers find themselves in much of the United Kingdom. The MND Association have said that 90% of those who care for people with MND feel that the welfare benefits they receive do not meet their needs as carers. Meanwhile, the MS Society, who are part of the Carer Poverty Coalition already referred to, and this week marks MS Awareness Week, conducted a 2022 report into the friends and family of those with MS, where only 17% of the respondents were in receipt of carers allowance. The restrictive access to carers allowance, the 21-hour study rule that exists south of the border, is arbitrary and means that those who need support are missing out. The UK government should follow Scotland's lead by removing the 21-hour study rule and enacting measures like the Scottish Young Carers Grant. Furthermore, it's nonsensical that those who care for more than one person often miss out on carers allowance because the eligibility rules don't allow for caring hours to be combined cumulatively. Many carers who spend the equivalent of a full-time job caring cannot access carers allowance, which shows how broken this system is. The MS Society have outlined the horrendously low rate of carers allowance and the financial impact this has on carers. Spread over 35 hours per week, the value of carers allowance equates to just £2.34 per hour, a whole £9 below the national minimum wage. This is horrendous, and the current rate of carers allowance is totally exploitative. This UK government takes advantage of the love carers have for those they care for and exploit their altruism and offer totally inadequate compensation in return. There is absolutely no recognition of how integral carers are to the functioning of society and the UK economy. It's essential that the UK government increase the level of carers allowance to at least the minimum wage so that it better reflects the financial impact of their caring responsibilities. Therefore, I support this important petition today. Coupled with the Carers Leave Act 2023 that I supported, which recently came into force, a move to increase carers allowance to minimum wage would demonstrate that the invaluable work of carers is finally receiving some of the recognition it deserves from the UK government. But more should be done. The government must increase the earnings limit to ensure that carers can work and earn if they are able to and wish to. The rhetoric from this government always focuses on getting people back into work and reducing economic inactivity, but they do not follow up their hollow talk by actually putting support mechanisms in place. Whether it's for disabled people or, in this case, carers, there is workforce potential that is not being tapped into because of lack of adequate support. With the current levels of support, unpaid carers are particularly vulnerable to falling into poverty, not just because of the devastatingly inadequate rate of carers allowance, but also due to carers' limited ability to earn an income and the additional costs they face that they cannot cut back on without affecting the safety of the person they care for. This includes costs like taking the person they care for to hospital, keeping their home at a safe minimum temperature, charging essential medical equipment for their loved one and doing extra laundry. This perfect storm of lack of recognition, lack of proper financial support risk of poverty, all whilst caring for a loved one leads to high levels of stress and can have a significant impact on the mental and physical health of the carer, seriously impinging on their own quality of life. In turn, this increases the carer's own need for treatment, support and services in order to help them cope. The SNP Scottish Government has taken action to mitigate the substandard levels of carers' allowance by introducing the Carers Allowance Supplement in 2018. It's paid half yearly and it's £288.60 in 2024. A trifling amount, you might think, but for some carers that makes a huge, huge difference. There's also a young carers package offering discounts and opportunities for all young carers aged 11 to 18. And the Scottish Government funds Carers Trust Scotland to run the Scottish Youth Young Carers Festival to allow young carers to take a break. Since its launch, the Scottish Government has made 920,000 carers allowance supplement payments, totalling around £255 million. In Scotland, we'd like to do more, but we're limited to the strict confines of budgetary constraints following cuts to the block grant. In an independent Scotland, more could be done to improve the lives of carers. Despite this, the Scottish Government continues to recognise the huge contributions that carers make to society. And in November 2023, as I've said, we launched the Carers Support Payment, which will replace this. This is the main Scottish social security benefit that will replace carers' allowance in Scotland. And Scottish social security treats all claimants with dignity, fairness and respect. The Carer Support Payment has been developed to deliver an improved service designed with carer and support organisations to meet the needs of those who use it and providing links to wider services to help carers access the support they are entitled to. Working within a fixed pocket money budget, the Scottish Government has continuously tried to mitigate cruel Westminster policies in order to treat carers with the respect they deserve. The Scottish Government is totally committed to carers and is investing £88.4 million per year in local carer support through Local Authority Carers Act funding and has provided £8 million per year for voluntary sector short breaks since 22-23, enabling more people, including young carers, to take a break from caring. Carer Positive Employers in Scotland was founded 10 years ago. I'm one of its members, as I believe we as MPs and MSPs should do all we can to promote this excellent scheme, which helps employers do their bit for carers they employ and gives good advice. It's time, I think, that the UK Government follows suit with some of these initiatives and shows carers the recognition and they deserve and gives them the financial support they need. We've heard this afternoon of carers being harassed and penalised for overpayments made by DWP, adding insult to injury. Will the Minister look at this? Will she also commit to responding positively to the DWP Select Committee reports in a timely manner and to stopping the cliff edge situation carers face re-benefits?
Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Ms Cummins. I'm grateful for the opportunity to respond on behalf of the Shadow Work and Pensions team. And I will start by congratulating the Honourable Member for Neath on securing this afternoon's debate. I'd also like to thank the thousands of people who signed the petition which triggered it, and in particular the Honourable Member for East Ham having the largest amount of constituents supporting it, which doesn't surprise me with the work that he does as chair of the DWP Select Committee. Now, as Shadow Minister for Disabled People, I come into contact with a lot of unpaid carers, and as a society, we should be incredibly grateful for everything that they do. I pay tribute to them and to the many organisations such as Carers UK and the Carers Trust who support them and stand up for their rights. And as the Honourable Member for Neath said in her opening remarks, carers are the unsung heroes, providing care around the clock and saving the taxpayer, quite literally, billions of pounds. And many members have gone and pointed out that today. And as the Honourable Member for East Ham also so eloquently put, and I know that the work of his select committee have been working on this, carers simply do not get enough money to be able to survive on. And as we've already heard, there are around 5.7 million unpaid carers in the UK. And as the Honourable Member for Wirral West pointed out, 72% are women and 44% of those who are working age and providing full-time care live in poverty. Carers should not be living, surviving in poverty. And to be eligible for carers allowance, an individual must provide at least 35 hours of unpaid care per week. And the person they care for must be in receipt on certain benefits. However, as the Honourable Member for Worsley and Ecclesouth pointed out, young carers in full-time education are not eligible for carers allowance. Now, the main route to qualifying is now via personal independence payments. 3 words which strike fear into the hearts of many people. And I'm sure everyone here will have PIP horror stories from their constituency casework. And I could talk all afternoon and very late into the evening about the problems with it. But I'll leave that for another time. And I do know that we've had many debates on this. Now, Chair, as others have already said, this debate is especially timely given the recent stories we've seen in the press about carers' allowance overpayments. Those in receipt of the benefit are allowed to have a second income from a job, but there are strict limits on how much they can earn, currently £151 a week. And if a carer's income rises above that level, for example, through working a few extra hours, they forfeit the entire benefit. And this results in an overpayment which the DWP then seeks to recover. Repayments build up incredibly because even if the weekly earnings limit is exceeded by as little as £1, claimants automatically become ineligible for the entire carers' allowance. Now, as the Honourable Member for East Ham's committee rightly have asked whether the government can uplift the earning limits paid, and I hope the Minister can inform us as to the government's thinking on this early evening. Now, I know we'll have all seen recent examples in the press of people who have been forced to repay thousands after breaching the income threshold by as little as a few pounds a week. Just as disabled people and those with long-term illnesses often describe feeling demonised and humiliated by the benefits system, sadly, so too do their carers. The government needs to urgently investigate the overpayments issue and to outline what steps it is taking to make sure it doesn't happen in the future, including publishing its report in full. And as the Honourable Member for Cynon Valley also pointed out, some people are not receiving the benefits that they are entitled to. But in order to ensure that unpaid carers are getting the support and recognition they deserve, we need to look beyond the issue of carers' allowance. And as the Honourable Member for Oldham East and Saddleworth so aptly pointed out and shared her experiences of the strains it puts on families, providing that essential support to their loved ones. So a future Labour government will transform social care for older people, children and disabled people alongside our 10-year plan for change and modernisation of the NHS. Labour will deliver a long-term plan for reform of adult social care that will lead to a world-class national care service. Our fair deal for carers will also ensure that both paid and unpaid carers are valued and supported. And as set out in our new deal for working people, our priority will be that care workers receive the pay, the conditions and the training they need to provide great care and to stay working in the sector. We will establish a new partnership with families who care for their loved ones to ensure they do not put themselves at risk simply by looking after other people they love. We will also support unpaid carers by introducing the right to flexible working and provide time away from work for caring responsibilities, join up services and support so families do not have to battle their way around the system, and give people in care homes a new legal right to see their loved ones. So in concluding, I just want to quote something that the Honourable Member for Cynon Valley tried a few times to get to say during the conclusion remarks. We need to stop the dehumanisation of benefit claimants, such as those who access carers' allowance, who we all know add so much to this country.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Ms Cummings. After a slightly protracted debate, it's a pleasure to try to respond to what's been a wide-ranging debate. And I would like to thank the Honourable Member for Neath for introducing today's e-petition debate with a very thoughtful and wide-ranging speech, which is characterful for her, and welcome Alistair raising this particular issue. I think this is a very welcome debate that comes at a very challenging time, post-COVID, during COVID, for our carers looking after their loved ones, and the impact of the cost of living due to the invasion of Ukraine. So a challenging time for all of us, but most particularly our carers. And I do want, like many, to begin by paying tribute to the millions of unpaid carers across this country. As honourable members who've spoken this afternoon have, very thoughtful personal contributions have been made by honourable members, and I duly note the queries and challenges they've raised. I've got lots of responses I'm going to try to make. Firstly, I know people are concerned that the government does not recognise and value the contribution made by carers every day in providing this significant care and continuity of support to family, friends, including pensioners and those with disabilities. But I think it's really important to put on record that is not my perception, that is not how I want people to see this government. I'll do my best to make that clear to those watching. Now, the 2021 census indicates that around 5 million people in England and Wales may be doing some unpaid care, with many of us taking on that role at some point in our lives. And like honourable members, I see much of the work that is done by carers in my post bag, at events in my own constituency, attending carers' rights days, engaging with my constituents in Mid-Sussex. So none of us are immune to the challenges of caring. And colleagues will know this is a particular interest for me as a former carer and as part of a caring family. And I know and I pay tribute to all those who do this daily. It's a difficult job, one that is the best and the worst in the world in some ways. And you will always be grateful that you've been there. It's precious and hard going in equal measure. And I pay tribute to all those doing that. And carers are fortunate enough to have some wonderful advocates. And we've seen that both today in the debate through their MPs, of course, but through organisations such as Carers UK, Carers Trust, the Learning and Work Institute, but to name but three. And some of them have been
mentioned already today. And I meet with Carers UK regularly. I'll be meeting again with them shortly. And I was delighted that my officials were able to meet recently with a wonderful delegation of inspirational young carers who in March were part of Young Carers Action Day. And I really want to pay tribute as well to the hundreds of our DWP staff, largely based in the Northwest, who do provide financial support to 1 million unpaid carers through the Carers Allowance day in and day out. And I absolutely want to make sure that our approach to mistakes or other issues, we're always happy to look at these and always treat each case on its merit. And I think, Ms Cummins, it would be misleading to the House if I was not completely clear that this is a policy area that I've been hugely interested in, both as a backbencher and looked at the work at the all-party group and now as a minister. So I have been acutely interested in these matters, and since coming to this role I can be clear with the House this is a matter that I have been examining. So I do genuinely welcome this debate today, and I want to support those unpaid carers to do some of the work, paid work that they love to do and want to do and continue to do themselves, something for them, something that they can balance alongside their commitments to their loved ones, the people they're looking after. And we have, of course, legislated to ensure that employees will be entitled to 5 days unpaid care leave per year and will be supported through a more flexible working in the workplace. And I say to employers listening, job design, supportive conversations, encourage employers to be part of acknowledging this invaluable role. This is a community and an employee and a government partnership. Happy to.
I hope that when she talks about legislating for the 5 days for carers, you will mention my honourable friend, the member for North East Fife, who piloted that legislation with cross-party support.
Yes, indeed, and I was very supportive of that myself, attending where possible to support that through, and I think the government absolutely cross-party welcomes the work that she did piloting that, and congratulations to her. Now, on the specific subject of the debate today, we are spending record amounts to support unpaid carers. Real terms expenditure for carers allowance is forecast to be £4.1 billion in 24-25, and by 28-29 the government's forecast to spend over £4.5 billion a year on carers allowance. We spend another £685 million to support carers receiving universal credit through the carer element. And as mentioned today, patterns of care have changed significantly over the last decade. People are providing vital unpaid care to relatives and friends in a whole range of circumstances that work for all concerned. But I also recognise none of this is easy. Now, nearly 1 million people are now receiving carers allowance, and the rate increased this month to £81.90 per the weekly rate, rather, increased this month to £81.90. So this does mean that since 2010, it will have increased from £53.90 to £81.90 a week, providing an additional £1,500 a year compared to 2010 for carers through the carers allowance. And of course, there are additional amounts, and I think this is really important for those watching and those maybe who haven't had this conversation about making sure that a universal credit and other ways forward carers are aware about, and they come forward to get the support that they need. That also can be through the Household Support Fund. We know that unexpected outgoings happen, and they should be reaching out through their local authority and also through Barnet Consequentials, and I know that this has been a really important support mechanism for carers. But it's important to know the crux of the petition today we've been debating is that we should turn carers allowance into a carer's wage. Now, it's important to emphasise that carers allowance is not, however, intended to be a replacement for a wage or a payment for services of caring, hence some of the issues, and rightly, raised today. Therefore, it's not directly comparable to either the national minimum wage or the national living wage. The principal purpose of the carers allowance, as it stands and under successive governments since 1976, is a measure of financial support and recognition, and I point out to a measure of, for people who are not able to work full-time because of their caring responsibilities. And I reiterate, I do welcome this debate and the opportunity to review and understand these issues. Now, successive governments have supported carers through the allowances and benefits and wider cross-government actions, rather than paying people directly for the tasks that they take in a way that an employer would, of course.
I just want to raise something that hasn't been raised in this debate and ask the Minister a question, because she made the point earlier that she refuted the point that the government doesn't recognise the contribution of carers. But I wanted to raise the fact that many carers themselves believe that the government should have and is missing having a national carer strategy. Such a strategy was launched by the Labour government with the backing of our Prime Ministers, one of former Prime Ministers, and yet was ditched by the coalition government after 2010. Much of what we've covered is about a range of issues which really would be better solved with a cross-party ministerial commitment going up to prime ministerial level on national carer strategy. And there's an excellent campaigner, Katie Stiles, who's been mentioned in this debate, who runs the We Care campaign to campaign for that very thing. But it's never been done by this government, and it's a real, black hole in your support for carers, in the government support for carers, that there is no national carer strategy. So I wondered if she'd address that.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her point. And the Honourable Member for East Ham, the Right Honourable Member, I should say, talked about this in 2 decades and took us back to 2008. In fact, the year that he was Minister of State in the department holding the welfare reform portfolio. This is not new, this is challenging, and I think the Honourable Lady makes an important point, and I'll try to, in some of my wider remarks, reply to that. And I'm very keen that when we discuss this later in the week in the Select Committee, we try to get to the crux of all the challenges, which is very wide for this debate. In terms of the Honourable Lady opposite from the front bench, the Honourable Lady from Deptford, she talked about the benefit delays and the challenge on the long-standing principle of the carer's allowance that can only be awarded once a decision has been made to trigger a disability benefit to the person being cared for. But the carer's allowance can be backdated to the date that the disability is payable from, and I believe there's around 100,000 people both on PIP and carers allowance. So I hope that goes in some ways to answering her. The Honourable Lady from Motherwell and Wishaw, with her characteristic approach, raises the work that Scotland are doing, and we will fully look at the evaluation and the changes that the Scottish Government makes with interest. Of course, we at DWP are supporting those changes, so we'll be engaging on this, and it goes to the Honourable Lady's point about looking and learning, and I think that's exactly where we should be. Many members spoke about young adult carers and the impact of study, and we are engaging with DFE. We have a cross-government working group meeting again soon. I think it's really important that carers maintain links with the education system, so carers are able to take that part-time education and receive carers allowance, and we do recognise rightly the aspirations of young carers will be to both complete their studies, build and have a successful career, but also be there for their loved one. And it's not just young carers. We also need to make sure those that are caring understand that they've developed amazing skills from caring that an employer will find invaluable, whether it's managing finances to that resilience that's been spoken about today, dealing with crisis, organisation and planning, and that level of interpersonal skills. So we need to make sure our young people in particular are able to get the financial support that they need while studying, but rightly are able to progress into the career that they want to. In terms of the query around the latest data on overpayments, now our most recent statistics is that carer allowance overpayments relating to earnings and employment represent about 2.1% of our £3.3 billion of carers allowance expenditure. So it's approximately around £70 million, but I will welcome the opportunity to discuss this further with the Select Committee later this week. Now, there's been so much in yeah, of course.
She could respond specifically to the point that I raised, quoting from the government's response 5 years ago to the Select Committee report. Paragraph 20, I'll just read it. It says, the VEP service receives the same information Universal Credit receives from HMRC. A notification is automatically received by VEP when the weekly net pay exceeds the carers allowance earnings limit. The VEP service then applies a series of rules to determine if a VEP alert should be sent on to the carers allowance unit to action. What is very puzzling, I think, is the department knows when it's being overpaid, but it seems it isn't doing anything. What's the reason for that?
Right Honourable Gentleman, I was just coming on to overpayments and obviously what's been in the press. And I'm not the leading minister when it comes to the fraud side of this policy, but obviously we'll be discussing it on Wednesday, and I'm keenly looking at it in the round and working with him. And please note, there's a lot of interest there. There's always more to matters and more to discuss, but individual cases obviously we should refrain from. Can I just try and answer the Honourable Gentleman's point? I think, so there's a balance here between the duty to recover overpayments with safeguards to manage repayments suitably. Claimants do have a responsibility to ensure that they're entitled to benefits, and we know to inform us about changes. We've improved customer communications to remind them of the importance of telling of us any earnings, including through the annual uprating letter. And also, the Honourable Lady opposite mentioned about doing a couple of extra hours here and there, where it can be balanced out using the process the Right Honourable Gentleman said, where we can show a pattern. Of course, we will always respond to that. But what he's talking about is getting upstream of this. But the issue is also, and I'm sure we'll get into the weeds of this somewhat on Wednesday, is about the expenses that can be incurred equally as well. So he is right to raise that there is a way of understanding that people may be in that situation, but of course there is expenses that can be part of that too. So I hope that gives him a partial answer, and I'll come to the Honourable Lady.
My query from the in relation to the medical advisor to the first tier tribunal of the statements that are included in their bundles.
Yeah, I thank the Honourable Lady for that point, and I'll take that away. In terms of the NAO and the wider reports, I think, as I say on Wednesday, I think I'll be keen to try and explain a little bit more. It's quite complicated for this particular arena. In regard to the Carers Allowance and the state pension overlapping, the Honourable Lady from Cannon Valley made that point. And state pension and Carers Allowance are both paid as an income replacement benefit. So the Carers Allowance replaces an income where the carer is not able to work full-time due to their caring responsibilities, while state pension replaces income in retirement. So for this reason, they cannot be paid together to avoid duplication of provision for the same need. However, if a carer's state pension is less than the carer's allowance, state pension is paid and topped up with carer's allowance to the basic weekly rate of carer's allowance. Where carer's allowance cannot be paid, the person will keep underlying entitlement to the benefit. Now, this gives access to an additional amount for carers in pension credit of £45.60 a week, which is just under £2,400 a year, and around 100,000 carers receive it as part of their pension credit award, and it is paid in to recognise the additional contribution responsibilities associated, and means that lower income pensioners with caring responsibilities can receive more than the lower income receipts of pension credit. And if a pensioner's income is above the limit for pension credit, they still may, however, be entitled to housing benefit. And I would again point them to the Household Support Fund and the Help to Claim service, which DWP has as well. The Right Honourable Gentleman from Kingston and Surbiton raised the aspect around young carers, and will, as I say, in all of this, it's a wide-ranging, challenging area that, particularly when young carers, to try to meet the objectives. But as we've discussed today, there are many objectives that we're trying to meet in all different and individual circumstances. The Honourable Lady as well from the Cunnan Valley also mentioned the support that wonderful organisations like Carers UK do, and indeed our own constituency offices, to help people to claim. Now, it's an easy to use online claim service now for carers allowance. 90% of people claim this way, and 9 out of 10 of people are happy with the claim service. Now, the Honourable Lady from Wirral West spoke about the earnings limits. Now, I appreciate carers are busy, there's a lot going on, but they are told about the earning limit when they claim, and they also get an annual uprating letter, as I say, reminding them of any changes. And we also use a text reminder, and I'd always say to carers, please engage with us, please, if there are any changes in circumstances overall. I'm just trying to see whether there's anything else that I wanted to raise. In terms of cost of living as well, we've supported hundreds of thousands of unpaid carers receiving means-tested benefits as well through the cost of living support, and also through support from their fuel bills. You know, as I say, it's been a difficult time, and delighted about that. Just trying to see if there's anything else that I was going to try to cover. Oh yes, the Honourable Lady from Neath rightly raised the 35-hour care threshold, and asked how was it decided upon. This dates back to 1976. When carers allowance was first introduced. 35 hours was the average working week at the time, and the view was that caring for 35 hours, therefore you couldn't be working full time. So therefore it was the basis on which the carers allowance support was introduced. And the Honourable Lady from Neath rightly raised as well the delivery of the carers assessments. I will ensure that ministers for the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities are aware of what the Honourable Lady said in terms of those concerns. And it was mentioned just now, the carers strategy. Now, the government rightly is supporting unpaid carers, and some of this was covered in the social care plan, People at the Heart of Care. But as discussed today, and hopefully I've spelt out, there is a lot to look at, and the Chair of the Select Committee also mentioned the research. Now, I've been looking specifically at that research in preparation for this session and the wider policy as a whole, and we're really carefully considering the right time to publish it. I found it extremely helpful and enlightening, and genuinely it is helping in policy thought and development. And I would just remind before I close, Ms Cummings, because I'm certain I'm over my time, that carers allowance and many carers doing some work receiving universal credit for those receiving UC, the 55% taper rate, and any applicable work allowance will help ensure that people are better off in work. That's been raised today. 90% of those receiving the UC carer element who are declaring earnings have a work allowance for those with a disability or a child indeed. That might be the situation they're in. I just wanted to note the commitment from the opposition in terms of reform of carers, and it's the first time that I had seen this, so it's pretty recent, and prior to that I know it had been a focus around earnings rules, so I'll take a look indeed about what others are promising, because as I say, some of this dates back to 1976, some of it for over 20 years. And I think we've spoken today about a picture which is mixed and challenging. Yeah, of course.
Thank the Minister for giving way, and also really glad to see that she's been re-promoted, something we actually forgot to go and mention in the debate. Happy to go and send her all the stuff in terms of our, what we're looking to do. And of course, more than happy if the Conservatives want to pinch some more of our policies in the future.
Characteristically, thank you very much, the Honourable Lady. The point was made today by the Chair of the Select Committee about having an open mind on this policy, and I think hopefully I've shown today that I very much have an open mind. So to conclude, we do appreciate this government that society relies on unpaid carers. It is the most challenging, fulfilling and difficult job. We recognise those challenges that they're facing. We are helping carers to stay in paid work, but there is more to do, and I think I've spelled that out today, and the opportunity to work with employers in a flexible labour market is very appealing, and there's more to build on. We're spending record amounts on carers allowance. We're providing unpaid carers with the help and support they need and deserve, and if they aren't getting that, please do come and talk to us. Our team are there to support you. And we will keep carers allowance under review as we do with all benefits. Thank you.
Christina Rees to wind up. Thank you, Ms. Cummins. Nice to see you in the chair. There is agreement amongst all speakers in this debate today, including the chair of the Work and Pension Select Committee, the official spokesperson for the opposition, the official spokesperson for the SNP, and everyone who's spoken today. I thank them all for their valuable contributions. I hope that the Minister, who I know is very magnanimous, will urge her government to review and reform all aspects of carers allowance that the petition, Alistair, and all speakers today have called for. And I'll say again how much I admire and respect all unpaid carers in the UK, and I thank them all from the bottom of my heart for what they do. And I thank the charities who support them. Carers are truly wonderful people, and they deserve to be recognised, valued and better supported by this government. And I hope that this government has listened today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The question is that this House has considered e-petition 640062 relating to carers allowance. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.